I would start by saying, one of the things that Bill has said numerous times, and he's talked about, his faith journey. And I don't know if I can quote it correctly, but I'm enough, I have enough, and he is enough. In thinking about events like this, events like doing the devotions, and when we were doing that during the pandemic, I think at this stage in life, and I don't know if this is indicative of a lot of people, but once the kids kind of grow up and move out of the house and you start getting some of the distractions, the daily distractions away, and it allows you time to really contemplate your life, your faith journey, where you are, your relationship with Christ. That, I know that's one of the things that we talk about last, but that's probably the prayer that I would ask for the most, is constantly reminding myself that, this is enough. I'm enough. And he is enough. He knows what our needs are. And, all of us get up daily with different burdens and different perspectives. And I think the more that we can be quiet and listen to things like this, things like your Sunday school lessons, Bill's sermons, my devotions, it's just, it really is an interesting time of life, because I don't remember another time, in at least my faith journey, where I had slowed down enough. And I guess that's a good segue to kind of jump into where this all started. I don't know how exciting this is, but we attended church at a Presbyterian church called Vandalia Presbyterian. My parents weren't charter members, but they were like one removed from charter members. So my recollection of growing up was always involvement with the church in various capacities, be it Cub Scouts, be it Boy Scouts, be it church basketball. There were always reasons for us to be at church. And it did not, I think I remember even going through confirmation, at 14, none of it was particularly important to me. It was just what it was. It was, it was the men in the church that participated in all of those events. I know, looking back now, were shaping me, but at the time, I don't remember feeling a calling or a yearning for a relationship with God per se. I also remember the Presbyterian church being very, I don't know quite the term, but the Glory Patra, the doxology. It was a lot of creedal, the Apostles' Creed. There was a lot of repetition from one service to the other. At the time, it was almost not irritating, but I didn't find it particularly exciting. Whereas, and I'll skip all the way to the end, when I'm laying in bed now, stressing and with anxiety about what's coming the next day, and can't sleep, a lot of times the Apostles' Creed is, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. I go through that very slowly, and I find peace. I find peace with that, and I look back on, that's one of those things that God puts in your life that at the time either means nothing, or you push it aside and brush it off as inconsequential. Yet here I am, 54, and it's something that I find that gives me buoyancy in rough waters. So growing up, Presbyterian church, I don't really, from a faith journey standpoint, all the way through confirmation, even, it was definitely laying a foundation. But what happened was one of the first individuals that was very, very important in my faith journey. His name was Dave Clemens. He was a youth pastor at my best friend's church. And he just had just a phenomenal way of meeting kids, particularly high school kids, where they were. He did not, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It was, you did not feel like you had to go off the beaten path to, he just would show up at the most mundane events and show interest in what you were doing. And he also had a ministry. It kind of seems weird now in our society that we demonize almost everything. He would cut hair of the guys, and back then it was mullets and permed mullets. I will say I only ever did that once, and just that was not for me. And that was obviously in the 80s, but he was just instrumental in probably laying the first foundation stones for me. And my point of rebirth, my being born again was, and I know this is going to sound like I'm almost making this up, but I can't remember if you've heard this before, but I was driving home. I was on my second Volkswagen. I'd already gone through one Volkswagen. I was on my second Volkswagen. I was 17 years old. I was coming back from a summer job. My dad was an executive with a textile company in Greensboro, and I would work summer jobs at his plants, his various plants, and was driving home, and I had just bought a cassette of the Cars, Heartbeat City, and the car caught on fire, and pulled over to the side of the road, and remember smoke coming over my shoulder. It was a big, it was a nut that it was a complete total loss. The car burned to the ground, and but I remember smoke coming over my shoulder and having the clear head to pull the Cars cassette out in the jewel case before I jumped out of the car. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, it was very much, it was a traumatic experience for sure. But I went back to work, and I really wish I knew this woman's name, and I don't. She came up to me. This was probably a couple of days after the thing had happened, and she was very blunt. She said, "What is your relationship with Christ?" And here I am, 17 years old. I've had 17 years of basketball, youth basketball at church, scouts, various youth trips, involved with most everything in church. I couldn't answer. And she laid it out pretty bluntly. And I don't know if, I do know now that that's exactly what I needed. That pushed me to join. It was a Southern Baptist church that this youth minister was an associate pastor in. And that was before leading up to college. And I look back now, what it did was give me, I don't know if the Southern Baptist, it was a kind of a typical Southern Baptist. I don't know if I fully agreed with they had the altar calls, they had the, hellfire and brimstone to a degree. I think as a teenager in the 80s, I probably needed that, because coming out of the Presbyterian, it was a little bit of Melba toast. I guess it was unleavened bread, but the Melba toast in the water. And that's probably unfair to the Presbyterians, but it was, from a teenager standpoint, it was not what I needed. This was very much what I needed at the time. So Dave Clemens was certainly very much an instrumental person in getting me prepared for college, which my college experience was very much like everyone else's college experience. You're exposed to a variety of different things. My personality has always been fairly driven. I wanted to be an architect from probably ninth grade on. Knew what I needed to do, achieved all of those goals, got into architecture school. Anyone that knows about architecture and architectural school, it's very demanding, a lot of hours, very intense. At a fraternity, was a brother in a fraternity to really just counterbalance that intensity. But again, you go through the ebbs and flows of your faith journey, and unfortunately, that was an ebb. I don't think God was he was present. He was whispering softly. I just don't know if I could quite hear him. But I also was taking intro into religion, those types of classes, and so still had a lot of curiosity about the world and our Creator, and what others' perspectives would be, and formulated. I won't humor you in telling you what my architecture brain had come up with, as far as it involved a disco ball. We'll just leave it at that. But to explain kind of world religion and our Creator, the second person that was most influential was the person that really set me straight on that misguidance. Steve Presley was an associate pastor at First Baptist in Greensboro, and I met Charlotte as I came back. I did a brief stint in Texas, and then I came back to North Carolina. Met Charlotte. Charlotte was a lifetime member at First Baptist in Greensboro. She was a 50-year member when we moved to Wake Forest, and she was only 50. So, it's all she ever knew was First Baptist. But Steve Presley was kind of old school at the time. Dr. Lally, from Southeastern was there. He married us. So I got a little bit of taste of Dr. Lally's preaching style, his ministry, his shepherding nature. I mean, he was just an amazing individual. Steve Presley was a very good bookend to that. He was very intellectual, just a wealth of knowledge, a very, very caring individual. I made the mistake, I guess I could say, of sharing my world religion philosophy with him. And the reason I say he's probably one, he definitely makes the list of someone that influenced me, is he was very, very clear that I was misguided, that, John tells us Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and he is the only path to the Father. And so while the world religions might be interesting, Christianity, love of God, love of Jesus, and acceptance of Jesus as our Savior is really the path that we have to the Father. So during that time, I guess, we're starting young families, and I would say the next group, there's several, but two key people. The reason they were influential, I think, was, you're struggling with just the day-to-day grind of having, a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a newborn, just trying to get through the daily slog of keeping everybody fed and keeping everybody happy and getting everybody dressed into church on time, et cetera, et cetera. Randy Lewis was one of our teachers, and then at a different time, Gail Wiley was another teacher, and both of them were a generation ahead of us. Their children, in Randy's situation, his children were older but still at the church, and then a little bit later on, Gail Wiley was a teacher, and her children were older and already starting to have children. Both of them, their perspective of their faith journey, what Christ meant to them in the context of family and importance of church, importance of getting up and going, Sunday, tithing, reading scripture. That last part did not really become important to me until later. I would almost say, and I don't mean to be jumping around, but at that point, all the way through even teenage years, even through some of these past experiences I've already talked about, reading the Bible to me almost felt like Alice in Wonderland, or really probably more The Wizard of Oz. Something behind the curtain that I could read the words, but nothing seemed to be finding purchase. But you keep struggling along and you kind of do your thing, and hopefully, just like all of this, none of it seemed like it was earth shattering at the time. You just kind of keep doing your thing. That leads us all the way up. Children grow up, a bit. I think, that was about the time we came to Wake Forest. Margaret had already left for college. Will and Jenny were still at home when we started making our home at Wake Forest. And, I think I would, I don't want to embarrass you, but I would certainly put you on the list of people that, really serve as an example of, what Christ intends us to do for other people. The amount of work that you put into lessons, I feel compelled to be as prepared as I can for your lessons. Other than that, the Wyatts, I know you've done the podcast with them as well. Neil Payton, you've done the podcast with the Paytons. It's just, the older I get, the more I realize, and I guess the appreciation I have for the people like those that I've mentioned, and there's many, many more in the church, that just serve as such a shining example of what Christ wants us to be. I guess most recently, this is God's hand. It had to have been God's hand. I was going to a closing. I was sitting in an attorney's office, and we were selling a piece of property to another builder, and did not know Jay from Adam. I knew his name, and that was about it. And I knew the attorney, Mitch Hatchett, pretty well. And I knew Mitch was part of BSF, Wednesday or Monday night Baptist men group. Jay, kind of one thing led to another, and there was also another banker involved. Jay's banker was there, and I guess it came out that Jay and Jonathan were in a Bible study together, and they invited me to it, and it's been going on. They've been going on for almost 10 years. I've been participating in probably, it was before COVID. It's probably a year and a half before COVID. So maybe mid 2018, maybe 2019, but it's just been a phenomenal group. And I so much look forward to every Friday morning, because we've gone through, we've done a lot of the letters from Paul. John was especially just really almost faith journey altering, going through word for word, line for line through John. James, the same way. And interestingly enough, we're going through Revelation right now. And many people, you just almost shudder when you say Revelation. This has been, not to be corny about it, but very revealing. Kind of putting all the symbolism and does this symbolize Babylon? Does this symbolize Apache helicopters? Putting all of that stuff aside, what God put on John, revealed to him in his visions, has just been, incredible. And we're not even, we're just in chapter 9 right now. So I know that's part of what I'm supposed to talk about, just kind of the daily routine or the faith journey routine. I guess that's the stage that I'm in life right now. Is I wake up early every morning. I do have quiet time. I try to do a devotion every day. I don't do it every day. Sometimes it just is quiet time. My indulgence, it's almost my vice, is politics. And sometimes I'm more intrigued by the goings on and the news of the day, and one thing leads to another, and my time period gets away from me, and I don't do the devotion. But the John MacArthur is what has really been a tool that I have discovered in the last, since really this Bible study's been going on. Mm-hmm. The Blue Book Bible, I think it's what it's called, that as well. Sometimes what I most like about John's commentaries is almost every chapter of the Bible has a sermon that he has preached on it. So in the related resources, you can, and a lot of times that's what I've done preparing for class is, if you're talking about chapter 9 and the unleashing of hell through the trumpets and the abyss in Revelation, more than likely he has taught a sermon on it. And it's very nice to be able to get an hour-long discussion on a subject. It also allows you, because of the digital nature of the Bible, which it's serving me well right now. That may not be for everyone, but it allows me to jump back and forth from references. In this particular case, allows you to, it'll make the reference that this is Ezekiel 14:1. You can click Ezekiel 14:1, you automatically go to it, and then you can click on the bottom and it goes right back to where you were. So to me, the way my brain processes, it allows me to stay on the thought and the hopefully what God is speaking to me. And whereas it's always, and I don't know if there is a correlation between this and the struggles I was having with the Bible before, but one, trying to figure out where Ezekiel was, and two, the time that it would take to get there, find the verse, then to go back, it seemed like there was a disconnect for me. So again, I don't claim that this is for everyone. It's just in this place at this time, it seems to be, a very good resource for me. And then if I am particularly intrigued, I go to the Blue Book Bible and go to the audio and video commentaries. In that I'm finding a lot of fulfillment in that as well. So.
Right. Go back just a little bit and fill in a couple of little spots that might be of interest to people. You grew up in what town?
Greensboro. Yeah, Greensboro, and then for most of my childhood, it was actually outside of Greensboro in Pleasant Garden, which was a country off the beaten path.
Yeah.
So
one
blinking stoplight.
And where did you go to high school?
It was we have a running joke in our family. There's city high schools, and then there were the directional schools. In Greensboro, all the county schools were, when it was different, it was county and city. The county, for some reason, they named them all directional schools. So I was in Southeast, which was down 421 out of Greensboro.
Okay.
So, and then Charlotte was, she went to Grimsley, which was a city school. So
Okay.
they looked down on the directional schools. They called them the directional schools.
Now, you and Charlotte met when you were in college or after college?
No, it was after college. I had worked as an architect in Dallas and came back. Her best friend was our office manager, and she immediately called Charlotte and said, "The tallest guy I've met just walked in," because Charlotte's 6 feet as well. And she said the only thing is he listens to weird music, which I didn't think was very weird at the time, but it was The Cure and REM and whatever. So, but yeah, that was the way we met. And she had, and she'll tell you her faith journey. Dr. Lally was pretty important, a pretty important figure for her. They had prayed. She was not going to date anyone shorter than her, and she wanted someone that was spiritually grounded and treated her well, and that's what they prayed, about. And she'll tell you to this day that I checked all the boxes. Some days I score better than than others, but.
Now you wanted to go off and be an architect, you said, since early in high school. Where did you end up going to school?
UNC Charlotte. So they had a really good architecture program.
Okay.
They did not recruit very well. It was not known nationally. I was successful enough that and impressed enough people, including the dean of students of the College of Architecture. He had a friend that was coming through, and unannounced, he just appeared at my desk one morning. One thing leads to another. There's a recession going on. Nobody's getting hired out of college, and here they are flying me off to Dallas and whining, dining, and it was a interesting time. It took me about 3 years to realize that I really wanted to be outside more than what architecture was going to allow. It was going to be a lot of just behind the.
Mhm.
It used to be when I was in high school. I'm old enough to where it was still drafting. Computers were really coming of their age in college, and by the time I got the job in Dallas, it was really a lot of computer time. It was AutoCAD, and it was really coming into its infancy. And I just realized I didn't want to spend that much time behind a computer screen. And then lo and behold, fast forward 30 years and I'm spending all my time behind a computer screen. So, but it's been a good run. I mean, I've loved construction. I love every aspect of construction.
So you got recruited right out of college to go to Dallas.
Yeah, I tell people I am blessed upon blessed. Let's see. I did not have to write a resume for that job. I did not have to write a resume in 3 years. I came home. I was coming home for Christmas to see my parents. My parents were moving from that home in Pleasant Garden, way out in Podunk, Pleasant Garden, in town to a kind of a swanky townhome. The developer that was doing that townhome was the development arm of the textile company that my dad worked for. So I didn't have anything else to do. I just tagged along. Well, we started getting into a discussion, the president of the company and I started getting into a discussion about urban planning and master plan communities, and one thing leads to another. 2 weeks, he calls unsolicited and says, "Hey, I got a position. Love you to come and take it." So I go back to Greensboro, never having to write a resume. And then 3 years into that, I'm sitting at a conference room table and just strike up a conversation with David, who I've worked now with for 27 years. And just really asking his advice about, look, I've gotten my contractor's license, not really sure how to break into the industry. One thing leads to another. 2 weeks later, he calls me unsolicited. So I've gone. I would say that I've never written a resume, but during the downturn, the 2007, 2008, I ended up staying with David all the way through the whole thing. But I did have to write a resume and was actually actively looking for something else.
Now, for the benefit of people who are listening to this, tell a little bit about what you do now.
So the evolution, what I did in Greensboro for 18 years was I project managed and construction managed my own jobs for a company called Wolf. It was kind of the heady heyday of residential construction, the late 90s and early 2000s. Man, everybody was just trying to outdo everybody. And it was quite fun. It was at that age, my young family building some just palatial estates. It was just a great learning experience, years of that learning experience. The last project I worked on was a $6.5 million penthouse that was on the 18th floor of a building with a 2-story waterfall, and I could go on and on with all the opulence. Because of the downturn, everything started slowing down, and I started coming over to Raleigh to help. Really, the plan was to help for a little while till things got back to normal, and then we would go back to life as we knew it. Charlotte and I had renovated a home that was built in 1929. We were the second owners. We had increased the size to about 4,000 square feet, put a garage on the back. It was really built for the kids, and we probably did too much. But what I had told Charlotte was, this was our forever home. As much as I was pretty naive, I was, you can never say never and never say always, is really what it boils down to. And as much as we hated it, I started coming over to Raleigh to help. It was pretty apparent that this whole recession thing was going to be going on longer than anybody ever imagined. And I tell people it started out, was going to be 2 days here, 3 days back home. And then it turned into 2 days there, 3 days here. And it turned into 2 nights stay at the Holiday Inn Express on Capitol Boulevard across from Texas Roadhouse, to get an apartment, to, if I elevate you to president of this franchise, would you move your family? And it was a hard decision. It was a hard decision mainly because it was an easy decision from Margaret's standpoint because she was going off to college. It was a hard decision from Will's point of view because she was 9th grade in high school, going into 10th grade. Looking back, did not realize how hard that was going to be for him. And then Jenny is, she's our social butterfly. She'll talk with anyone, get to know anyone, is probably the most caring person and giving person aside from Charlotte that I know. So she had a very easy time. But there was a little bit of trepidation from that standpoint, just uprooting the family. Yeah. But in hindsight, it's been, blessings of, on top of blessings on top of blessings. And I'm not just saying this. I mean, in large part, this is, the part of Wake Forest, Baptist. We've just felt very much at home, since really day one. Finding a church, finding a Sunday school class, I think is so important with really any church, but in particular with Wake Forest. I mean, I think having the ability to have a closer group of people that you rely on, and they know that they can rely on you, and then studying God's word, and break out, in smaller sessions like this. I'm fairly, what would be the correct adjective? I do very much. In fact, in the event that we did at the fellowship hall where we were talking to individuals, formations, very much, I very much like formations. It's what I like about it is that you can jump in and jump out.
Mhm.
and that there's some regularity. Um, um, if you ask my style of worship, I probably err on the side of some consistency, and I don't like the spontaneity and I know some people do like that, but formations to me is just an excellent tool. It's deep enough to where, I can, in some cases, I'll kind of do a deep dive and really explore context and history on a particular um, uh, scripture. In some cases, there's enough meat there that
Mhm.
that reading the lesson, I feel fulfilled enough to come in and participate. Some and I mention this to you sometimes. Some I'm like, man, I'm getting nothing from this. I'm very interested to see what Joe comes up with. Uh, but just finding the Sunday school class, I think, is important, just like any other church. Um, I think the church in general suffers a bit from people. Call it what you will, whether it's kind of keeping everything at arm's length or superficial, or I think the phrase that I've heard that really has resonated with me is um, knowing about God but not knowing God.
Mhm.
Um, I hope that my experiences over the last few years, I'm knowing God. That's my sincere
Mhm.
prayer. Hopefully, this is not, I won't look back on this and think it's misguided. I'm very intrigued by the Bible study. I'm very intrigued by my Wednesday group, my Sunday school lessons, um, participation in the handyman. Um, I've Where do you see God? I see God every time we get together and we do anything. I
Mhm.
see God in Habitat for Humanity. Unfortunately, in Wake County, Habitat it's a difficult time. It's a problem that we don't have property that is inexpensive enough for someone like Habitat, or an organization like Habitat, to be able to purchase property and build affordable housing. It's such a wonderful program
Mhm.
for people to be able to lift themselves up, with the help of other volunteers. It's just a organization that's very near and dear to my heart. I just wish they had more opportunities in this area.
Mhm. You've been involved in a lot of different programs and ministries here in the church. When did y'all actually join Wake Forest Baptist?
It's been Charlotte's the one that keeps up with all all this stuff. Um, we were here for about a year and a half before we joined, so it probably was 2018.
Yeah, it's not been that
2018.
long.
Yeah,
And you've been very involved, like you've already mentioned a couple of things, Habitat for Humanity. I know you've been involved with the handyman ministry.
yeah.
I know you've been involved, of course, with Sunday school. You've been in the choir.
Leadership
Um,
Leadership Council
yeah,
was.
talk about that a little bit. I mean, chairing the leadership council, what was that like for you?
I mean, it was humbling. In the let me back up, because my experience at First Baptist was total immersion as well. I mean, it was deacons, finance, long range planning. Had two experiences. We didn't talk about this, but two experiences. One with Baptist Faith and Message, struggling with the 1963 version and the 2000 version. This was in 2000.
Hmm.
So, Will was born that same year. So to kind of put it in context, um, as a young Christian, dealing with heady subjects like uh, disavowing the 2000 version of the Baptist Faith and Message as a church, that I participated. I had an active role in that, but it was a whole lot of sitting back and listening to very much wiser, older sages that
Mhm.
um, but that was extremely eye-opening to me, really, is what it means to be a Baptist. The non-creedal, the autonomy of the church, the priesthood of the
Mhm.
believer, kind of the tenets, the foundation of what it is to be Baptist. Um, and then the other one that was just incredibly huge was believers' baptism, struggle with the believers' baptism. The church, I don't know what the impetus of this was, but if it was a single event or a person or what, but was participating actively in the church struggling with what did it mean to be a member of the church, and was baptism by immersion necessary? My mother was still alive at the time. She's been gone for nearly 20 years. She was still alive at the time, and I remember, man, distinctly to this day. She was I get my personality from her. She was not a shy person. She was a first grade teacher and passionate about everything that she did. She grew up Methodist, and I remember her saying that if someone could come to her and explain and convince her and convince God that what she had gone through before did not take and that needed to be redone and be immersed, that she would entertain, but she knew no one would be able to do that. She was adamant that that was not going to happen, that she was not going to get baptized by immersion just to check a box. So ultimately, the church ended up deciding that the only two questions that you can ask as someone comes forward is, do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? And do you want to be a part of this community of believers? That's really all it comes down to. And if you've had a believer's baptism, that satisfies. If you feel that God has put on your heart to have a public profession of baptism, then so be it. That's where the church came down, and I feel like that's where I came down in all of this.
Yeah.
Getting back to Steve Presley's guidance and his wisdom, he was the one that really told me, there are sacraments, and they are called sacred for a reason. And there are certain things that you need to draw a box around and protect. And they're few. They're really, in the Baptist tradition, it's really the Eucharist and baptism. It's the Lord's Supper and baptism. You can't really, in my mind, I would get uncomfortable if having the wafer, the COVID Eucharist. That's about as far as I can can go. I know everybody jokes about those, and hopefully they're on their last run. We can get back to some normalcy with that as well. But those were really defining moments. In the church at Wake Forest, I know you and I've had this discussion, but for the benefit of people listening to this, the PPP loan,
Mhm.
I'll share with people that it was really one of those watershed moments for me. I absolutely saw God in the church body the night of the vote.
Mm.
Bill Slater and I were the only ones in the fellowship hall, and it broke my heart that someone like Bill Slater, knowing that his flock, there was dissension within the sheep, and he had no one around him aside from me in the fellowship hall, whereas normally this would have been a called meeting in the fellowship hall. No matter what side you came down on, people would be coming up and reassuring, and there was none of that. So Bill went into all of this cold, and I think the church, it was just one of the shining moments of the church. I think we debated and struggled, and I think people talked for and against. I think the people that were for absolutely thought they were doing the right thing, and the people that were against were absolutely thinking that they were right as well. We ended up taking the vote, and we didn't hear anything else about it. You know, the discussion was respectful, and you know, I'd been in church, but in situations where it was not as respectful as in the two that I named before are two examples. People were just as passionate, and so.
Well, thank you for your leadership during that time. That was a challenging time to be the chair of the leadership council, for sure.
Yeah.
Go back. I don't want to miss this. Go back and give us a brief update on your children and what they're up to, and maybe kind of ages and that kind of thing, because not everybody knows about your children.
So Margaret is our oldest. Not very many people even know Margaret. She, like I said, when we moved to Wake Forest, she was in college at App. She got an actuarial degree at App, and then has worked. She's now in her second insurance company now in Charlotte. She changed jobs about 2 months ago, so it's still relatively new. Her first position, unfortunately, everyone is going to know where they were. I was talking to somebody today on a job interview, interviewing for a position that I'm trying to fill. And I said, everybody in this industry is going to know where they were in 2007, 2008 in the recession. And they're going to know where they were in 2020 and 2021. Sure. She entered the workforce right as COVID was hitting. So it was interesting 2 years. But very successful. She's our child that she's not really ever had to work very hard at much of anything, and has been successful at most everything she's done. Will was 2 years at Charlotte Mechanical Engineering when COVID hit, and was not having a very good experience with the COVID aspect. When everything shut down, we decided, and I say we because it went against almost every fiber of my being. I'm very much of, you start something, you're going to finish it, even if you have to kind of claw yourself across the finish line with bloody knuckles. You're going to finish it. I actually told him I did not think he was getting a very good return on his investment, and decided to take a gap year. One thing leads to another. We needed help. And also we needed employees because of the PPP loan that our company had taken out. It started out, it was going to be just a temporary thing. And I think he would say the same thing. He kind of found his passion. He did not talk about any of this, had no intention of doing anything related to what I pursued as a career. He started buying tools and really bettering himself, bought a van. He works for us during the week. And then he has started his own business. It's called Key Creations, which is fine woodworking. And I work with him on the weekends. The equipment that he's bought, my particular situation with an interior designer that needs specialty art pieces and furniture pieces, things that trim carpenters don't really want to get involved with, and things that the cabinet makers and installers don't really want to get involved with. So there's a niche there. There's certainly a need. And, that's been a really, really special, the ability for us to spend time with one another. Mm-hmm. And, just talk about life and faith and tools and guns and women, and it's been a very very nice transition into his adulthood. And then lastly, Jenny is ending up her first year at college in USC Charlotte. She's going to be her major now is healthcare management, So we'll see. We'll see. You know, she works the hardest, but just as successful. So she'll be successful no matter what she does. But she loves every aspect of where she is, her sorority. She's just a very, very good place, and I'm very pleased because all three kids seem to be landed in in a good spot.
What does Larry do for fun?
Well, it used to be, funny story. I don't know if I shared this with you, but I had a physical about 4 years ago, maybe. And the doctor asked me, what did I do to relieve stress? That's the way he phrased it. And I said, "Do you hear the story? Have you ever heard this?" I said, "I make lists." And he dropped his pen and he said, "All right, run that past me again." And I said, "Well, you asked me what I do to relieve stress. I make lists. I feel more at ease and less stressed if I can put things on paper and wrap my head around it and develop a plan." He said, "All right, we're going to do this 6 months from now, and I want you to come in with a different answer." And I think Charlotte would probably attest that for quite a while, I think I've loved what I've done, what I do for so long, that my work was my hobby. And in some cases that's healthy, and in some cases that's not healthy. And I think part of what this whole evolution with Will has brought out, I built furniture in college, and my passion was woodworking. But my goal, my single-mindedness, my goal was architecture. So I put the woodworking to the side and continued down the path of architectural. Then family comes along, and sports, and life, and there's just not time or space to invest in that as a hobby. And with what Will's going through, I find in fact, it's sitting right off a camera. I built an urn for my father, and it was dual purpose. I find it's almost you cannot think about the stresses of life when you're working with wood. A lot of times you're working around equipment, and you're so focused on where your fingers are, where your arms are, where what you're wearing. Are you leaning correctly over the joiner or the planer? That it really kind of empties your mind. Time goes by fast, but also it's time to reflect about things as well. When I say it was dual purpose, I've reflected a lot about my dad, about his dad, about what Will is doing. My grandfather worked for Cannon Mills, but he also built houses on the side. He wanted my father to come out of high school and for them to start a building company. And my dad had gotten a full ride to Carolina, and was the first kid in his family to go to college. Ended up doing that. Well, my grandfather didn't talk to him for a while, a year and a half, or so. And that was always very disturbing for my dad. My dad was always handy, always had tools. So I got my grandfather's tools passed down to me. I got my father's tools passed down to me. And then, Will's invested in his tools. And it was just a lot of reflection on, things that I think my father felt like he was successful at, and things that he could have done better, the things that I was successful at, and the things that I certainly think I could have done better. And then knowing that I've got time, with Will and the other, with Margaret and Jenny, to try to use this little blip of time that we have on Earth before meeting our Maker, to try to do the best job we can in raising them instilling in
Yeah.
them what family means and what church means and what's, what's important in life.
Let me ask you this question here. If you could sum up in a few words, what your faith means to you and the difference it's made in your life, what would you say to that?
And it just ebbs and flows. It's gotten much more intense the last 5 or 6 years. It almost feels like it's like in my mind's eye, it's always been like a Geiger counter, or it swings back and forth violently, and then calms down, and then swings back and forth violently, and then calms down. And I'm hoping that grounding myself in the things that we've talked about, between the morning devotions, the Bible studies, that I can kind of keep it more calm and less erratic. We're blessed. We're in a place where life is not throwing us as many curveballs. So it's easier from that standpoint. I would hope that my faith would be as strong if I was facing adversity. I don't know if we can legitimately say we're facing adversity. We live not super comfortably, but I mean, we've got a fairly easy life. Wake Forest is a little quiet town, not so little and not so quiet anymore, but it's a nice place to live. We have a wonderful church family. We don't face daily adversities. So I think of someone like Job, that, and I know he's always the example, but I mean, you can go all throughout the Bible. John writing Revelation from Patmos, after being persecuted, James having his head, cut off, Paul being thrown in prison. The biblical examples were given of people that are faithful through, I think it was one of our Sunday school lessons where we talked about the guard. Paul just thought that was just an opportunity to preach to the guards. That's almost mind blowing. I shared for many years the prayer concern about our niece and nephew and their child Emmett. And Emmett is still struggling, but still doing well. She has a heart condition. She was born with half a heart, but she was also born with several other complications. And I know that our nephew has put out on social media that he's struggling mightily with God and his faith. And I wouldn't even say it's struggling. I think it's a lot of anger. And I think a lot about what that would be. What would I be in that situation? When you're seeing the suffering of a child for 5 years now, their routine, their daily routine is beyond what anyone could comprehend. And then going through COVID, it just made it even worse. And I guess that's my faith I hold near and dear. I wish it would, my hope would be that it would be as near and dear facing adversity. I guess I don't know if that really answers your question. It's what I struggle with right now.
Got one more question I want to ask you, but before I do, is there anything that I should be asking you that I haven't asked you? Anything else that you want to speak to before we wrap up?
No, I don't. We've talked about a lot. I think I haven't talked much about the part that choir has played. I've dropped out for a variety of reasons, mostly COVID related, masks, and I was not having a very easy time singing with a mask. But the experience of going to New York and singing in Carnegie Hall And what I feel like the blessing that Bryant brings to this church is beyond description. Yeah, the men's chorus. I think the men's chorus was probably what pulled me in initially. I listened to those men sing a few times, and I just remember thinking, I want to be a part of that. And again, I just think as a gift that we can lay at the feet of God. I think one of the traveling for the guest directors, she talked about that music is a gift from God, and that gift she feels is bestowed upon directors, composers like herself, that then give that gift to people like Bryant, that then give that gift to choirs, that then give that to sanctuary, the church members, which is then lifted back to God, and it's just a circle.
Mhm.
I do remember one incredibly special time. The only funeral that I've ever gone to of someone that I did not have the pleasure of ever meeting, John Wooten, who I never met. He
Mhm.
was in ill health, I guess, when I first started coming in. But anyway, I was part of the sanctuary choir, and they asked, because I guess he was a fairly instrumental member of the choir. They asked choir members to come at 2 p.m. or something, and I remember Bryant saying, "Be careful. Remember, what you're doing is a service to the family and to God. And much like a surgeon has to just, put everything aside and
Mhm.
focus on what his task is, it's very much the same with a choir." And I remember hearing that and not really taking it to heart. And I made the mistake of listening to the words we were singing, and looking up at Wanda and the rest of the family at that time, and just about completely, I did lose it to a point where I couldn't sing. I couldn't sing for
Mm.
a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
But it's the power. It's the power of
Yeah.
music, the power of the gifts that people have. And we're just very, very blessed, not with just Bryant, but with quite a few of the choir members, and what the gifts, Jeannie, the things they bring to the church. So anyway, sorry, I did want to talk about the music part.
Last question I wanted to ask you is, what is it that for people who would listen to this, for me, for others, what is it that we could pray about for you?
My personality is very much the type that I still joke with people in my office. You can have whatever opinion you want, but it's just a matter of time until you come around to my way of thinking. And we say that jokingly, but my personality has always been, in fact, in my early days of my career, David, who I've worked for many, many, many years, would have to say, listen more, talk less. Don't necessarily try to have a solution for every situation. Keep in mind other people's perspectives. And for me, it's easier now than it was in my spit and vinegar days. But my request for prayer would be that I am calm, and that I can listen, and that I can meet people, much like Dave Clemens that I mentioned earlier in the discussion. Meet people where they are, and know that I don't necessarily have to have a solution, and that in some cases it's just having a listening ear, and you know listening to their perspective on things. I think that would probably be the biggest request is just because I constantly have to remind myself that.
Mhm.
I tend to want to gallop when I should probably just trot.
Well, Larry, it's been great visiting with you. Thank you so much for being willing to share your story and a little bit about your faith journey. You and your family have meant a lot to the church in such a short period of time. You know, you've served in a lot of capacities, and we're very blessed to have you. And just thank you for all you continue to do for the church, and we will pray for you going
All right.
forward.
Well, Joe, right back at you. I mean, I can't say enough of how what you and Kathy mean to both Charlotte and me and to this church. And I really do appreciate you doing this. It's been a hoot listening to different people's stories. It's a great idea.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Larry.